Welcome to Writer Pants on Fire, where authors talk about things that never happened to people who don't exist. We also cover craft, the agent hunt, query trenches, publishing industry, marketing, and more. I'm your host, Mindy McGinnis. You can check out my books and social media at mindymcginnis.com, and make sure to visit the Writer Pants on Fire blog for additional interviews, query critiques, and more at writerpantsonfire.com. We're here with Len Joy, author of Everyone Dies Famous. Len came to, if not writing, definitely publishing in his 60s. And I've had quite a few guests who entered onto this journey later on in life, and they always seem to get a really good response. I think that aspiring writers like to hear that you don't have to have made it before you're 30. I personally wasn't published till I was in my mid-30s, so I feel that pressure often in my 20s of, maybe not having accomplished things or hit any pinnacle that I was aiming for yet. And of course, when you're in your 20s, it feels like you need to be doing something now. So I'd really just like to talk about making that choice and making that move towards publishing later in life. But first, let's talk about writing. Have you always been a writer, or did you come to the actual act of writing later as well?
I think when I was really young, it's hard to remember sometimes that far back, I did have these aspirations. I liked the idea of being a writer. When I went off to college in the 60s, became an English major. That was the path I thought to world fame as a writer. Mm-hmm. I went to the University of Rochester, but during the first year, actually, took this course on English literature, and the professor just shredded my paper. I was only 18, I didn't have a lot of confidence, and he sort of totally destroyed it at that point. And I switched to economics, and I went into business, and I still had that notion, but I was just convinced I don't have the talent to be a writer. You do a lot of writing in business, but I had a small business manufacturing company, and I was always writing to banks asking for money. So, and describing businesses and stuff. But, once we started having children, and I liked to write about the kids and sort of poke fun at them and my wife and myself. And so I got a lot of great feedback on my holiday letter, and it was easy when the kids were young and couldn't read it. But, I continued that tradition, and I realized that was something I really enjoyed doing. And, I still continue in my business for about 20 years. And then around about 2003, I got a mail flyer from the University of Chicago's Graham School offering creative writing course. Do I want to take that? And I was winding down the business. I had a business, so my business was in Phoenix, and I'm in Chicago, and I did it with my brother-in-law. And so I would commute back and forth for basically every 10 days. I'd go to Phoenix and then come back. And so I did a lot of reading and, sort of writing during those long flights. But it always gives an excuse. Well, I couldn't take any other courses because my schedule was so irregular. But once that stopped, basically on a whim, I decided I would try this course, and I really enjoyed it, and I got good feedback. It was just the basics of writing, like write 300 words fiction. And, the instructor was encouraging, but not don't quit your day job kind of encouraging. Just I enjoyed writing. I liked telling stories. I moved on and took like a whole sequence of courses from the university. And then I also, each year I would go to the Iowa Writers Festival, which is a great program. I mean, they give you so many different opportunities. It's like summer camp for adults. You get a week away from everything else and just sort of immersed in whatever course you're taking and going to book readings and stuff like that. And so that was probably, I was in my 50s then. I didn't consider myself a novelist. Some people, I think, have a novel when they want to write, and I didn't have that. I had stories and experience. I was running a manufacturing company, a small engine remanufacturing business, 300 employees, just a lot of material for writing. It wasn't a great business, but it was a great experience. And I think that's one of the disadvantage of writing when you're older is that you're older and you have less time to make your mark, but the advantage is, in addition to having maybe more financial stability, is that you have a lot of experience. So,
yeah, and it's that experience, I think, that is interesting. And I want to come back to that because you mentioned having a professor, a teacher, a mentor kind of really dissuade you from something that you were interested in and turned you away from something that you wanted. You said that you felt as if you were being told you didn't have the talent to write. I think it's very interesting to take that statement and set it beside what you just said about having experience, because personally, and my viewpoint on this has changed. I used to really bank on that word, talent, and believe that it was a latent thing that we were given at birth or not. As I have become older and looked at some of the writing I produced in my 20s, I can definitively tell you that is not true. I thought I was really good. And I'm not saying that you weren't at 18. I'm simply saying that I know the writing that I was producing in my 20s that was being rejected again and again and again. As I have told my listeners before, I was querying for 10 years. I was rejected for 10 years, and I earned all of those rejections because my writing was not ready yet. As a 42-year-old, I can look back at that and identify a seed, a germ, be it creativity or whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to call it talent because that wasn't there yet. I learned from my criticism. It sounds like you had a rough brush. I never had anyone tell me, you're not going to make it because you don't have what it takes.
Yeah.
I had people say, you need to work if you want this, which is a true statement and a helpful statement. Simply saying you don't have it is not helpful. With this in mind, I want you to think about, because I know I have many educators too out there that listen to my podcast, putting those two statements beside each other. What do you find to be like the takeaway there? Talent versus work and travail.
I have this sort of dual career of writing and competing in triathlons, both of which I went into in my 50s. My position, my feeling is that most people have a decent amount of talent, if you want to call it that, or ability. Let's say ability to say write or compete athletically, and then there's always a few, the rare exception in writing where the person doesn't need any training at all; they're just naturally brilliant. But that's such a small percentage. I don't think it really applies. Is even with your ability, you need to work at it. Like whether it's a sport or writing, you need training. I know I benefited from that great instructors. That opened my eyes to how much there is involved in the profession of writing. It's not just sitting down and writing words. There's a lot of things, storytelling and formation of the stories, and just mundane things like dialogue, punctuation, and there's just a lot to learn. And I found you have to put in the time. There's no shortcut to that. I tell that story more because it's a cautionary tale for me. Like when people are in workshops, to remember that when, like a lot of the workshops now, you get, there'll be 18-year-olds and 20-year-olds and 40 and 50 and 60-year-olds. And as we get older, sometimes, after, you get out in the real world and you get rejected in a lot of ways, like in customers and stuff like that. And it can maybe coarsen you or harden you a little bit. But, I always remember that 18-year-old boy who was so sensitive, like me. It wasn't that the professor was like the same experience you probably had. It's like the paper wasn't very good. I wasn't used to writing paper. Mm-hmm. I just took it to heart, and I made a good choice at that time to go into a business, and which I also enjoyed. And I didn't extinguish the flame. I postponed that adventure.
Postponement is a good word to use here. It's a long journey. No matter how you use your mile markers, publishing and writing, the line always extends further into the distance. There's always something else you're going to want. I'll put it that way. Yeah. I remember in my, let's call it naivete, in my 20s thinking, if I could just get a book published, then I'll be happy. I think I have 12 books published now.
You're really happy.
I'm not, though. You always want something else. You always want something
Right.
more. And now I'm like, you know what? I've done well. I'm able to learn a living as a writer. I'm not a New York Times best-selling author, though. If I could just get that, right? I mean, the rung is always moving higher. And that is a good thing because it pushes us to continue to improve. Let's talk then about your book and moving forward through these years of writing, knowing that you wanted to write, having that creative flame still burning inside. Walk us through that process and how you arrived where you are now with a small press title.
Going back to when I was taking those courses, I started taking novel writing courses, and they had a sequence at the University of Chicago. And I didn't realize when I signed up that most people who were taking that course already have written what they think of as their novel, and they were just trying to figure out how to make it better. I had no novel. I just been taking short stories and writing really flash fiction and things. And when I took that course where we were going to critique a chapter each week, great incentive to apply myself. I took a short story I had about a guy who pitches driving down the road heading towards a wedding or something. I avowed that, I would write a chapter each week. Ultimately, 4 or 5 years later, became my first novel, American Pastime. It took a long time to get it published because I was trying, in the original format, it had grown to like a 50-year saga from the 50s up to early 2000. And I got some good feedback as I was trying to get it published that debut author, it's too long, it's too involved, you need to cut it back. And, those are really tough things to hear, but I was able to, flexible enough. I cut the novel in half, cut out many of my beloved characters and ended it in right after the Vietnam War. Family saga about the stonemason family. Dancer Stonemason is this guy who pitches a perfect game in the minor leagues, and then his life unravels. He doesn't make it to the majors, and it's sort of America growing up in the 50s and 60s through the war. So I ended it there, and it managed to get a small publisher, and got great reviews and some sales success. It's really hard to sell from those independent platforms, but. Mm-hmm. And then I wrote another novel that was different from that, Better Days. But I came back I had all this material that I'd used, decided I could continue the story, even though it's a standalone novel. I wrote Everyone Dies Famous using the same characters that survived 30 years later. The whole novel takes place in a single day. In some ways a lot easier, and in some ways more challenging, but all the activity is focused, and it gives you a good framework to write the story.
You made that jump to becoming a published author. You're with a small press. You mentioned earlier, this is an experience you've had before. It is difficult to move quantities when you're with a small press, simply because there's so much noise out there in the world. Making yourself visible is difficult. I'm published with one of the big five, and I can tell you it's still difficult to get attention and get eyes on your book and put yourself in front of people, simply because there's just so much noise all the time. Everyone saying, I wrote a book. It's very hard to make yourself stand out. What has your experience been then with the indie press world? And are you looking to replicate that? Are you going to stay in the indie world, or are you what's in your future?
I was fortunate. I was published by a group called Hark New Era Publishing, a husband and wife team. I was their first book published, and as it turned out, I was their last book published because they had children and careers. Then they were trying to make this work, and it they just couldn't keep it going. But they were really good editors. So the next book, I moved on to another small press. I wasn't satisfied really with the marketing attention and the arrangement. So I actually bought the book back from them and went through Kindle direct publishing for that experience, and which was good. I'm glad I did that because it gave me a chance to experiment with trying to do social media ads. And it's just something I'm not good at, and I really would like to have the help doing it. And I'm 69 years old. I can't wait years for, the agents to see the wonder of my work. I just finished my fourth novel, but because I would like to move up what I consider the food chain to the big press and stuff. And you need an agent to do that. I can feel for agents because they get it sounds like hundreds of submissions a week.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just have to go through quickly. And I always want to take my shot at it. But For Everyone Dies Famous was published by BQB Publishing, which is a hybrid publisher. I'm just very grateful for that. That when I started writing it, I don't think that was even an option. BQB does a quality job. They publish good books, and they provide, it's a partnership. They're doing what you'd have to do as a self-publisher, but for most of us, they're doing a much better job at that, and they share the royalties. And I'd love to make a living at it, but I've made a living, and what I'd really like to get is readers.
You bring up an interesting point, and you're not the first person that I've had say this. I've had multiple authors who are older say,
Right.
my remaining window is only so big. I
planning to live forever, but we may not,
Right. We might not. I mean, that's a pretty good bet. So it is something you have to consider. It may not be the most happy thought, but it is, in fact, reality. And also, you were saying that you took the step of buying your rights back and self-publishing through Kindle Direct, trying to figure out the confusing algorithm maze that is Kindle, Amazon advertising, Facebook advertising, any of it. It is not easy. Yeah. I have friends in the indie publishing industry that are like, no, I mean, that's 50% of their job is just figuring out how to crack those algorithms, how to put together an ad that works and all of those things. And of course, it's all very tech heavy, which I imagine, making a generalization, but I imagine may also be more intimidating for someone that hasn't grown up and been around computers and really digging into them their entire lives.
Right.
The We As Start Talking podcast is a place for great conversations, topics, and stories from people just like you and me. This podcast is focused on changing the world one conversation at a time. Each episode features a new guest, and along with their 4 hosts, they explore raw, honest, vulnerable, and fun subjects, all in an effort to start talking. If you crave truth, compassion, understanding, real-life stories, and want to be entertained, you've come to the right place. Episodes release on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays of every week, so there is always a great conversation waiting for you. Check out the We As Start Talking website at www.weas.ca. Have a look at the merch store, reach out to the team, and meet the hosts of We As Start Talking. The We As Start Talking podcast, making the world a better place, one conversation at a time. I am very interested to talk to you about another aspect of your life, that being athleticism. Mm-hmm. I am also an athlete, was an athlete through high school, lost that in my 20s and in my beginning of my 30s simply because I was too busy, and returned to it then end of 30s and now into my early 40s. And you are a competitive triathlete.
I was a jock growing up. I went to college thinking I could play football, and I love sports. And after college, there's no way to have competition. Started hearing about these triathlons. I thought about it for like about 10 years. It's like I'm an average at running, biking, and swimming, not elite and by any stretch, but put them all together, maybe I could compete. Write a page a day and I'll have a novel in a year. But it got me, I took a couple of YMCA classes, and then I found a trainer, and you discover a whole new world. It's a lot. I thought I could swim. This morning, my training was I had an hour and a half bike ride on the trainer in the basement now that we're all, sequestered. But, and then I went to the Y for a swim lesson. So it's like, it's great because I'm continuing to learn stuff, and, I'm not elite really, but because of my age group, I'm able to compete on Team USA because there's just fewer and fewer of us still competing. And
you've completed an Ironman, correct?
That was a great experience. I don't think I'll repeat it because it just takes so much time of, training, to do it. But I did that one, an Ironman in Idaho, Coeur d'Alene, with a group that I still train with. And some people just, that I've trained with have gone on to do 10 or 11 Ironmans. And I just don't have the time. It's like,
right.
You have to ride, a bike training ride is like 6 hours. Like that's a lot.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's so I'm a support staff for an Ironman here locally. I run around like stabbing trash and picking it up and grabbing people's water bottles and, taking their empty, and sometimes they're taking their, full piss bottles, and so it's like, I don't compete because I would drown. Like that's all there is to it. I would be dead. So that's not in the cards for me and never will be. I do support because it's amazing. I mean, it's a stunning amount of athleticism and determination and just mind over matter involved in that. And I love that you as an individual are participating in both exercising the mind and the body, constantly moving forward and learning. That's what I aspire in 20 years. I want to be able to say the same thing.
I always find like those activities are really complementary in the sense that I ran the Boston Marathon, like I got a chance to do that. And you run a marathon, you don't run like 26 miles at once. It's a step at a time. You train for it, just like a novel. You just do a little bit each day. To train on days when you don't want to train. And the same with writing. You got to sit down and do something every day. And they support each other. Plus, be easy, especially now with the world the way it is, like not to get out of bed like in the morning.
Oh yeah. If you don't give me a reason to get out of bed, I'll stay there. So yeah. Last thing, if you could let people know where they can find you online, that would be great.
On my website, www.lenjoybooks.com, Facebook, search for Len Joy. The same with Twitter. I have a newsletter and I would welcome more subscribers.
Writer, Pants on Fire is produced by Mindy McGinnis. Music by Jack Corbel. Don't forget to check out the blog for additional interviews, writing advice, and publication tips at writerpantsonfire.com. If the blog or podcast have been helpful to you, or if you just enjoy listening, please consider donating. Visit writerpantsonfire.com and click Support the Blog and Podcast in the sidebar.